Ole Miss is three things happening away from smashing Michigan State and Auburn to make the Final Four. We'll tell you what they are.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I am your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today, we are diving into what has the Ole Miss fan base buzzing. The road to the Final Fours is looking as good as it could be for a number one seed, even with a number two and a number one still looming in the bracket. There are three keys and three things that need to click for Ole Miss to move from a really good team to a great team. And if that happens over this coming weekend, Ole Miss is Final Four bound. We'll tell you all about that. It all starts with the dynamic duo of Matthew Murrell and Jaemyn Brakefield. If they can pull off a performance similar to what they did to Iowa State, in that offensive firepower, you will better believe that Ole Miss will be pretty much unstoppable offensively. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. And don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy, offering even more perspectives on college football, the SEC, and yes, even Ole Miss. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new Nissan Armada. Stay with us with the Armada Team of the Week a little bit later on in the episode. So this has been a really fun weekend for me. I've enjoyed basically going all out on basketball and handling basketball in a really similar way that I handle football. And whenever Ole Miss got into the tournament, it's like, hey, this is kind of quicker turnaround, but you can do a lot of the same stuff that you do during football season. And football season, as anybody that has watched this channel knows, football season is my wheelhouse. I do that very, very good. And whenever you look at my background, you can see why. I've watched a ton of film. I'm extremely knowledgeable on the game. But basketball, I realized that I could take some things and move them over to here. And this basketball weekend coming up, for starting Friday night with the Michigan State game, and then potentially even either Auburn or Michigan if Ole Miss is able to win that game, it's interesting. Ole Miss has the second lowest odds of all the teams left in the NCAA tournament to win it all. They are the last or next to last in their own region to get through, and it makes sense. I mean, you have Auburn going up against the 5 seed. You have Michigan State going up against the 6 seed. Ole Miss is the lowest seed team left in there. Michigan State's favored by about 2.5 points right now. It's kind of a coin flip game, like most of the games have been in the tournament. And it's a game that Ole Miss can win. It literally can. It's going to come down to little things for Ole Miss to get over the hump. And Michigan State has not looked dominant at any point during this tournament. They've looked good. I'm not saying they haven't looked good, but they haven't necessarily looked dominant either. They struggled for 35 minutes against New Mexico before eventually pulling away at the end. And that might just be what Michigan State does, to where they play you close and they just wear you down and they beat you at the end. So these three things that I'm going to tell you about, they're going to be very important for Ole Miss to move to the next level, to go from a good team to a great team, to win games against a 2 seed, to finally beat Auburn the 4th time they play, if they play, to match up against Michigan, which, by the way, out of the 3 teams left in the South Regional, Michigan is probably the worst matchup for Ole Miss, but we'll jump off that bridge when we get there. But for Ole Miss to become an elite team that is Final Four worthy, they need 3 things over the course of this weekend to happen. And the first thing has already happened multiple times this season. So it's not a pie-in-the-sky wish. It's not anything like that. You just need Jaemyn Brakefield and Matthew Murrell to go for about 15 points apiece. If they do that, Ole Miss's offense becomes nearly unguardable. Because of the 3-point shots on the wing, the dribble drive, that becomes much more effective. Malik Dia becomes much more of a force because you can't help as much. Because of all of that stuff, the offense becomes really good. And if Ole Miss is hitting their shots, which they will be if this is happening, because Matthew Murrell hitting his shots, He's the best three-point shooter that Ole Miss has, even though not statistically. Sean Padula is statistically that guy, but for whatever reason, probably injury-related, Matthew Murrell hasn't been as consistent with his jump shot this season. If he can get up to about 15 points a game over these next two against Michigan State and either Auburn or Michigan, Ole Miss has a chance to smash whoever they play. Ole Miss becomes nearly unguardable. And the way that Ole Miss plays defense and the way that Ole Miss doesn't turn the ball over, if they can just be competitive in the rebound battle, they've basically whipped you in every major aspect of a basketball game. And it all starts with Jaemyn Brakefield and Matthew Murrell having that special game. Now, the arena in Milwaukee was fantastic. It was an advantage for Ole Miss. For whatever reason, Ole Miss shot the ball really well in that environment, in that gym, with the views that it had. And maybe that's going to translate pretty well to the State Farm Arena in Atlanta. But Iowa State struggled shooting the ball up there. North Carolina struggled shooting the ball up there. Now, part of that is the fact that Ole Miss just D'd you up. But part of that is just in a different arena, and it's a little bit bigger. It can change the sight lines, and that can affect shooters. Did not affect Ole Miss, affected North Carolina and Iowa State until probably 3 minutes to go in the game against Iowa State. Maybe State Farm Arena in Atlanta has similar viewpoints, and that shooting continues, because that's a major advantage for Ole Miss in this tournament. For whatever reason, the rims in this tournament are hard. You notice that by the number of layups that get missed. There's not a lot of basketballs that kind of bounce around the rim and come in. Whenever they hit the rim, they bounce off. It's like playing on that playground whenever you were doing pickup when you were 15 years old, and you're playing in like First Baptist McGee that had these super thick rims that was very hard. And if you made it, it was fantastic. But if it hit the rim at all, odds are it wasn't going in. That is kind of what it looks like is happening in this tournament. Matthew Murrell didn't affect him against Iowa State. Didn't affect Jaemyn Brakefield. They both shot the ball really well. Sean Padula has shot the ball really well. Gigi Murray has shot the ball really well. Even Dre Davis had a major three-point shooting night. So I'm not worried about the NBA arena affecting an Ole Miss shooting. But if you look at what Michigan State did in Cleveland in their game against New Mexico, they didn't shoot the ball overly well. And one of their better players had a horrible night shooting the ball. The same thing happened for a period of time against Bryant. So Jaemyn Brakefield and Matthew Murrell shooting the ball well is a way to separate from other teams playing. Now, you could get down to Atlanta and Michigan State just as hot as a firecracker, $3 pistol, whatever you want to say. But if everything translates from the week before into the week coming up, Michigan State could be in a little bit of trouble, because if you do not shoot the ball well, especially in the corner against this Ole Miss no-middle defense, Ole Miss can go on a long, sustained run. They can force a scoring drought like they did against Iowa State, to where they had a 20-2 run. If you do that, all of a sudden the offense is going to perk up. Ole Miss goes from being a 68-point offense to a 82-point offense, and your margin of error gets a little bit wider. And that is one of the steps that Ole Miss can take to kind of go from good to great. The other thing, or the next thing, this weekend could hinge on is Dre Davis's foul situation. If he stays out of early foul trouble and kind of is able to keep his offense rolling, Ole Miss can reach another level, especially on the inside, especially in offensive rebounding. We'll break that all down next. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to unexpected upsets, these guys have showcased their strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Arkansas Razorbacks. Despite losing their first 5 SEC games, Coach Cal's Hogs fought their way through the most rugged conference in college basketball to not only make the tournament, but to knock off back-to-back national champion and Hall of Fame coaches en route to a Sweet 16. Yeah, they beat Kansas and St. John's and Rick Pitino. They accomplished all of this without their second leading scorer, Boogie Flan, for most of SEC play, and without leading scorer and rebounder, Adu Thoreau, so far in the NCAA tournament. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Arkansas Razorbacks have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. That's shopnissanusa.com. The next major key that Ole Miss needs to go, the thing that absolutely must happen for Ole Miss to go from a Sweet 16 team to winning these two games this weekend and smashing and going to the Final Four. Dre Davis has to avoid early foul trouble. Avoid the silly reach-in fouls. Avoid the and ones to where a 2-point play and a layup becomes a 3-point play. In football, Ed Orgeron, whenever I worked at Ole Miss, he'd always say this to his defensive units because he was at his heart a defensive line coach at heart. But he would talk to offensive players with his defense and all that. But whenever they try and make an extra play, you would get yourself in trouble. He says, keep a dead play dead. Don't give them life. Whenever something doesn't work, you can make up 2 points. You don't need to make up 3 points because depending on how the game is going, a 3-point play can take it from 7 to 10. It can take it from 4 to 7. But either way, it can extend it beyond a possession in the game. And Dre Davis, when he is on, like against North Carolina, when he was really on, you had a player that was completely dangerous in the lane. He was making plays at the basket. He was offensive rebounding. He was hitting 3-point shots. He has the versatility to do a ton of stuff. That's Dre Davis's game. He can be so good. And for instance, when Ole Miss took down Louisville earlier in the season, Dre Davis had a really big game. Ole Miss ended up winning that game by 20-something points. Against Kentucky, he played well. Against Texas, he played well. When Dre Davis plays well, Ole Miss wins. When Ole Miss loses is usually when Dre Davis kind of finds a way to get himself in foul trouble or messes up his own rhythm. Against Auburn, he got into foul trouble in 2 or all 3 of the games. I'm not sure about one of them, but it would be a situation where he fouled out with like 9 minutes to go or something like that in the first time they met. They were a matchup problem for him, and he allowed it to affect him by reaching and doing things like that. If he can avoid the early foul trouble, because Michigan State's going to be a physical team. Auburn, we all know that they can be a physical team. We all know that they can absolutely D you up. Absolutely. It's fine. But Dre Davis is the Ole Miss player that is such an athletic player that he can kind of soak up what's going on as long as he doesn't commit those silly fouls and allows foul trouble to take him out of the rhythm of the game. If he can play free, if he can play fresh, if it's not a quick whistle in the game against Michigan State to where he's allowed to check, where he's allowed to physically defend, Ole Miss has a major advantage when you look at the rims that are set up to where outside shooting is a little bit more difficult. It's very much unforgiving. And then you can kind of guard next to the basket. Michigan State is going to do what TJ Otzelberger for Iowa State wanted to do and tried to do the first 5 minutes before Ole Miss was able to kind of shut that down. And that is they want to attack the glass. They know that their advantage is going to reside in rebounding. It's another example where Dre Davis is needed on the floor. He is needed out there for his athletic ability, his rebounding ability. Whenever he is playing on the floor and other people have to pay attention to him, that takes pressure off of Malik Dia. And that's a theme in this game and a theme in this video. And we're not going to really talk about Malik Dia, but all of these players, and if all of these things happen, Malik Dia is naturally going to be a more effective, better player. but you don't want to just say, hey, Malik Dia needs to be really good or really consistent and all that. No, these are three things that can make that happen. You're dealing with a physical defensive team in the Michigan State Spartans. You're dealing with a physical defensive team, potentially, with the Auburn Tigers. And you have the Twin Towers with Michigan. Like I said, that would be a bad matchup for Ole Miss. Ole Miss fans need to be rooting for Auburn Friday night. Michigan, that's a bad matchup with them twin 7-footers that have the flexibility to move out. That's problematic. But when it comes to Michigan State, when it comes to Auburn, you do need somebody that has the athletic ability to get on the floor and rebound the ball. Athletic ability to kind of wiggle his way in between bodies to force people off. That's hard to block out. When Dre Davis is really wanting to play, whenever he is really locked in, he is a matchup problem for each and every single team Ole Miss plays. So if you look at the two things that we've talked about so far, Jaemyn, Brakefield, and Matthew Murrell are on offensively to the point of about 15 points in the game. Real similar to what they did in Iowa State. If Ole Miss does that, all of a sudden that's going to open up the inside and the middle, and somebody like Dre Davis is going to be perfectly positioned to take advantage. The other team is definitely going to be paying attention to Malik Dia, whether it be Michigan State or Auburn or even Michigan. But when you look at Dre Davis and what he could provide for this team and how it could spread out when Matthew Murrell has to be worried about hitting threes, when Jaemyn Brakefield has to be worried about outside and the driving, when that defender is thinking completely about that. Sean Padula and Juju Murray, those guys just need to be themselves. Whenever that happens, Dre Davis has a chance to be the X factor, the one that, who do you guard? Ole Miss has 10 players that are averaging double figures on the season. They have 7 players that are 1,000-point scorers. That is by design. Whenever you look at what Chris Beard did, and what Chris Beard will tell you, I went and got 10-point scores to go get 10-point scores because he didn't think Ole Miss needed a Batman. And for the most part of this season, they have it. But occasionally, they have to avoid scoring droughts. That is going to be the key. And somebody like Dre Davis, somebody like Malik Dia, whenever you're not Sean Padula and you're taking jump shots out there, you need to be able to count on somebody near the rim to get on points, and you need to attack the lane as much as humanly possible. These aren't the only things that you need to think about. In our final segment, Ole Miss also needs 6 points from Eduardo Clafley or Davin Barnes just to keep the defense honest. If they're a threat, the Rebels' Big Six becomes even more dangerous. We'll break that down next. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're into plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right the first time. And plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts for 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for that extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every single order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage of this. Now it is your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That is supplyhouse.com. So lastly, the last thing for Ole Miss to smash Michigan State and Auburn and make their way into the Final Four and be the story of the entire NCAA tournament in the same way that other teams that have made a run have done. This year's surprise team could be the Ole Miss Rebels if these three things happen. Well, the third thing is they need their 8th player, their 7th player on the court to give them a little bit of offense this game. Not much, just a little bit. They're capable of it. Davin Barnes is a 1,000-point scorer. Eduardo Klafke is a defensive machine. But when they're on the floor, whoever's guarding them, whenever Ole Miss has the ball, can sink a little bit. They can prepare to help. They're not having anything to really be afraid of. Occasionally, Davin Barnes has been able to score some points, and he's given Ole Miss a little bit of work on the offensive end. I think he had 4 points against Iowa State. Ole Miss needs 6 points from Davin Barnes and Eduardo Klafke in the game. In the game against Michigan State, in the game against Auburn, you need something to force the defenders to pay attention to them offensively. And I get what they give the team on defense. Both of those guys are absolutely defensive stalwarts, and what they do for the Ole Miss Rebel basketball team is invaluable. But if you want to take it to the next level, they need about 6 points apiece in the game. Now, Eduardo Klafke, he has not shot the ball particularly well. He did make a big shot against Arkansas in the SEC tournament. But if he shoots the ball well, scores a couple of points to where the defense has to pay attention to him, just think of how it's going to spread the team out. Because whenever Jaemyn Brakefield and Matthew Murrell need a break, which it has to happen, they're not going to play 40 minutes, not whenever they have to turn around in 2 days. They're going to have to come off the court at some point. Davin Barnes is going to have to play. Eduardo Klafke is going to have to play. If you can make it to where the other team has to respect them as offensive weapons the same way that they have to think about Matthew Murrell and Jaemyn Brakefield, that's going to make Malik Dia even more effective. That's going to make the lane thin out a little bit. That's going to make it to where the Michigan State Spartans and Auburn Tigers or Michigan Wolverines will not be able to help defend whenever dribble drives happen. There's not going to be an ease for a defender to come off of Klafke or Davin Barnes to help with whoever's going against Malik Dia, whoever's trying to stop a Juju Murray drive, whoever is trying to stop Sean Padula. It is going to be massive for Ole Miss in their journey to try and go from good to great. They probably need their number 7 or number 8 options on their team as offensive options for their team. You need about 6 points, not free throws. I'm talking about run-of-the-mill in the game points. This is the game. This is the time where Eduardo Klafke probably needs to score a basket, because there have been times this season to when offensively he's just kind of looked lost. Whenever it looks like the moment's overwhelming him on that side of the ball. On defense, he's a dude. You look at him defensively, he's a problem. That's the reason he stays on the floor, despite his offensive struggles. But if Klafke can figure out a way to score a couple of baskets, you will see this Ole Miss team get even a little bit more confident. They can run a lot of the same stuff that they would normally run with Brakefield and Murrell in the game. And all of a sudden, there's no rest for the Michigan State defense. There's no rest for the Auburn defense. There's no rest for the Michigan defense. Whoever Ole Miss plays this week, the advent and improvement of Davin Barnes and Eduardo Klafke will be instrumental for Ole Miss winning that game. Listen, Michigan State's a 2 seed. Auburn's a 1 seed. Michigan's a 5 seed. Ole Miss, if they beat Michigan State, is either going to play Michigan or Auburn. Ole Miss fans should probably hope for Auburn because you know that team and the mismatch that would happen. We talked about the NCAA tournament being all about matchups. A Michigan matchup would be problematic at best. Ole Miss, I do not think, would match up very well with the Michigan Wolverines. But when you look at Michigan State, I think they're as far as a 2 seed, that's a good as any to be up against. I guess you could say St. John's, but as good as any to be up against. When you look at Auburn, you've lost 3 times to them. The 4th time's who knows. They've played 2 close games, and they've been really blown out at Auburn. But a game on a neutral court should be interesting. And when you look at the facility in Atlanta, they're going to have, 20,000 people there at State Farm where the Hawks play. Auburn's just 3 miles up the road or 300 miles down the road or something like that. Auburn's not far from Atlanta, 2.5, 3 hours, I should say. And then you got Ole Miss and the Ole Miss fan base. You're probably 6 hours, 7 hours away. And then you got the 2 Michigan schools to where they have to legitimately come down 10, 11, 12 hours. I'm expecting a lot of powder blue in Atlanta. I'm expecting a lot of orange in Atlanta. I'm sure there'll be a ton of maize and blue, and I'm sure there'll be a ton of green as well. But this has a chance to be a whole lot of fun. If Ole Miss does these 3 things I just mentioned, they're not difficult. Ole Miss has done them all, but they've not done them at the same time for long periods of time other than the Iowa State game for about 20 minutes. If Ole Miss can do that consistently for 40 minutes, they're not losing a game in the Sweet 16 round or the Elite 8 round. That Ole Miss team's not losing. If Ole Miss shoots 58% from 3 and you not out rebounding them and they take care of the basketball, you're not beating that Ole Miss team. I've said all season, and I am consistent with this, that unless you out rebound Ole Miss, you have no chance. If Ole Miss out rebounds you, you have no chance. You need to out rebound Ole Miss by 10. If you can do that, all of a sudden it'll counteract a little bit them taking care of the ball, because they don't turn the ball over much either. And when they're locked in, man, they're pretty fun to watch. They were pretty fun to watch the other night. But Michigan State's going to be a tough task. Good team. If Ole Miss lost the game, nobody would be surprised about that. But if Ole Miss won the game, nobody would be surprised about that either. And that is the difference between this trip to the Sweet 16 than the one in 2001. In 2001, Ole Miss had a game against a 1 seed in Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. I think Ole Miss was a 4 in that game. I could be wrong. About that. But Arizona had Mike Bibby. Arizona was kind of the darlings of the tournament that year. Heck, and if I'm not mistaken, I think they went on to win it that year or something like that. But Ole Miss fans hoped to win that game. If things just went so, Ole Miss can win the game. This Michigan State game, Michigan State's a 2.5-point favorite. It's a coin flip. It's a basket either way. If Ole Miss goes out and plays well, they can win this game. Ole Miss has already beaten Alabama. They've beaten Tennessee. They've beaten Kentucky. They've beaten Illinois in the preseason exhibition. They won a game over Houston in an exhibition. That was their super secret closed door one, by the way. Ole Miss has won some games against really good teams. They got a win over BYU. A last-second loss to Purdue, if you want to look at what they have in the Sweet 16. 3 losses to Auburn and a loss to Florida. This is a pretty battle-tested, good Ole Miss team that is not going to shy away from anything that Michigan State can throw at them. It's just the way it is. So we'll see exactly how that looks as it goes. Friday night, 6:09 Central Time on CBS. And hopefully Ole Miss is ready to go and the shooting heat continues. Anyway, thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen. For your second listen, check out the Locked On College Basketball Show with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. March is here, so be the most informed college basketball fan throughout the madness. Find the Locked On College Basketball Show on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everyone. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.